And Kezzy is introducing us, I think.
Hello, everybody. I am introducing everybody. I was going to let a few more people turn up and I was having a little bit of an air dance. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our second global online Unconference. To be honest, in terms of total Unconferences, I've lost count because I'm a bit old now and I don't know how many Unconferences we've done.
It's 7. This is our 7.
It's set. Oh my goodness. Wow, what a legacy. I'm absolutely thrilled that you're able to join us this evening. And I'm going to shortly introduce you, or let my fellow global strategic leaders introduce themselves, rather, because they speak for themselves. We're hoping that Jules can join us. I think she's going to be joining us in a lay-by. So hopefully she'll be doing that safely. Our themes this weekend are disrupt, innovate and change. And as we introduce ourselves, I do apologise, the dog's already going. There's something on the telly. Welcome to the usual online chaos that is Kezia's house when there are pugs around. Apologies. We are going to introduce ourselves and talk about what we'd like to disrupt. And I think a lot of people will be very unsurprised to hear that this week in the UK, I would really like to disrupt that both myself and my 72-year-old mother and my sister and my 14-year-old daughter and every other woman that I know needs to change their behaviour, apparently, to keep themselves safe in a way that other people don't need to, just walking down the street. And certainly if they're approached by a single police officer, they should be resisting arrest, apparently, or flagging down buses. I'm very angry about this. I'm sure many of us are. It feels a very fitting thing to be raising this weekend. And I'm sure over the weekend we'll be thinking about all the women and girls that are victims of violence around the world. I'm now going to hand over to Vivian, who is also going to talk about disruption.
Hello, I'm Vivian Porritt. We've all got our Twitter names on there as well, so it'd be lovely if you could give us a follow. My aspect that I really want to disrupt will come as no surprise to anybody, which is about the gender pay gap. And I really, really want everybody to remove the current salary question from their application form. I am absolutely thrilled to say that in the UK, the Department for Education has a teacher vacancies site, and they are removing the current salary question from their application form. And apparently 80% of schools are using it. So I am absolutely thrilled. And I want everyone else to join in with it, please, so we can really have a significant change in that. Very pleased.
That's brilliant. I think that's real impact. I'm going to hand over to Jules because, as everyone can see, she is literally in a lay-by, and therefore we're going to join her very quickly before we lose her again. Jules, we're just saying hello to everybody, introducing ourselves, and briefly stating something that we would like to disrupt.
You're on mute, Jules.
Jules.
Hello. I'm in a car. I'm in the middle of North Dorset. I really love all those disruptions, and I still keep going back to the disruptions about if you want to be a senior leader and part-time. From my very first Unconference, when somebody said that they were called a hobby teacher for being part-time, and loads of women I've spoken to have lost their TLR points or their senior leadership positions because they've gone part-time. So for me, it's really disrupting that mindset that you can't be a leader if you're part-time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. We're going to hand over to Lisa, who is all the way over in Canada, which for a global unconference is fairly normal, I guess.
Hello, Lisa here. I am at work in Calgary. I've got a big sign on my door that says bugger off. So far, the sign has worked. So here's the thing. Yesterday, our government had our first National Truth and Reconciliation Day to honor, to acknowledge, to learn about the history and legacy of residential schools in Canada. So today I am wearing a orange shirt, Every Child Matters, because every child does matter and every child grows into a woman or man that matters. And I suppose I want to disrupt that. We actually have an inquiry in Canada of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Women are not safe, and they're less safe when they don't look like me. Brown, Black, Indigenous, it's terrible. And it doesn't matter if we're in the UK or Canada. People who look like us, and I mean white skin, have stolen land from people, have stolen culture and language and cultural ceremony. And we need to reconcile that. We need to acknowledge the truth, because that's a whole group of women who haven't been able to aspire to leadership because of their culture, their color, and it's disgusting. So I'm here to disrupt that. I realize I have a laptop and 2 screens. So I'm looking into space because I have my screen there. So I look like I'm a little crazy. And I know we're not supposed to use that word. I'm sorry, but I am just a little. So I am excited for this weekend. I'm not sleeping until sometime Sunday, I think. I may or may not be broad all the time. I am now because I'm at work, but cheers. And you know what? Be who you are.
Yes.
Woo.
Fantastic. And thank you for that, Lisa. Going to hand over to Natasha Hilton now.
Hi everyone, Natasha Hilton here from, well, I'm based obviously in Qatar, Doha. It's, what is it, 8 p.m. 8 p.m. and I have a son downstairs playing a ridiculous game and most probably making loads of noise. I have shouted him a couple of times, so bear with me if you hear him shouting. I will go and shout him again. I am introducing you to our mentee that we have running the whole weekend. So Kezia has told you that we have disrupt as one of our hashtags, and I've just added that in the chats for you. We are also looking at innovate and change, and in the mentee over the weekend there are 4 questions that we would like you to respond to, and you can respond to them throughout the whole weekend. We will add that link into the chats and we will continue to remind you about that, so do please go into the mentee and answer those questions over the weekend, and we are so excited to get this started.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Natasha. Please do join in with Mentee. We're going to introduce now the wonderful Liz Free.
Hi everybody, so I'm, excuse me, so I'm in Switzerland. I'm a CEO and director of the International School Rheintal, and apart from it being a Friday evening here in Switzerland, which is lovely and very quiet in the mountains, I wanted to really focus on disruption, which normally I think I'm pretty moderate, but the last week or so I've become increasingly less moderate, and the reason why is I went to an IB, so that's International Baccalaureate Conference. I see somebody in the chat is just talking about curriculum. And it was a mandatory, you have to do this if you're an IB school, head of school course, 3 days. The whole 3 days, all of the leadership references were white men. Not only that, 100% of them were Anglo-American from an organization that espouses international mindedness. And so the last 2 weeks, I've been digging deeper and deeper and deeper into international organizations that work in the international sector, which I work in as well, and to see whether or not they really are international, and do we have representation that serves the communities that it represents. And what I'm finding, I've just written a piece actually looking at this, is it's very interesting when we start to look at things like leadership competencies, in organizations, what is the research based on and where has that research come? And then interestingly for International Baccalaureate, which I love dearly in terms of their mission, I'm really excited in the next week to see their first publishing of their gender pay gap data. And I really hope that we can start to see not only gender representation, equitable gender representation in international organizations like IB that can lead the way, but we also see diversity and representation in those groups as well. So I'm on a mission in the next week or so to really focus on that.
Apologies for that. I was just trying to do my own mentee and I was distracted. Liz, fantastic. And I'm now absolutely delighted to hand over to Palm, who I think is going to talk about disruption and then it's going to kick off the main part of this evening. Colleagues, thank you ever so much. We're going to be around all this weekend. Please have a fantastic time. It's wonderful to see names and people. Get involved on social media. That's where we were born and it's where we continue to grow. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kezia. That was awesome. I'm going to miss the pugs in a moment. So hi, everyone. My name is Pam Plummer and I am based in Jersey. What do I want to disrupt? I've had so many conversations this week about feeling marginalized, feeling pushed aside with so many of my friends, both male and female. So what do I want to disrupt and change? I want to change the narrative that leadership has to be aggressive, that you have to be bossy to be a leader, that you have to be a certain kind of person. I want to see more inclusive leadership, more diverse leadership, because I think that we owe that to all of you, to all of us, and to every single child in our schools as well. So that's my pledge, and we better get this weekend off the ground because it is 6:10 now, and we have got so many fantastic speakers for you this weekend. It was such a joy to look at the huge range of people that were really interested in getting involved and speaking at this Unconference. It genuinely was a privilege to look through that list and to be completely awed, first of all, by the huge range of not only speakers from across our global community, but also the sheer kind of range of different ideas and views and things that people wanted to discuss. And I have to say, it was incredibly hard to narrow that down, but we wanted to get as many new voices as we could into this weekend. So without further ado, we've got our first speaker today. So let's get cracking. We've got a fun-packed weekend for you. And our first speaker is Nicola Arkenstall, who is going to be talking to you about how can educational leaders make recruitment less biased. Now, she's a deputy head teacher for over 20 years experience, and she's currently studying a master's with the NCE, which she has found, the National College of Education, which she's found really inspiring. She's based in the West Midlands. And Nikki, just a question, is that master's with Women Ed, out of interest?
Yeah, I'm doing it with Vivian, actually. Vivian is one of our tutors. It's fantastic. But yeah, so it's really, really good. It's a senior leadership master's in education.
Excellent. And would you recommend it to others?
Absolutely. It's been phenomenal in terms of how much I've learned and just opening my mind in terms of leadership and leadership skills. So yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Right. Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, brilliant, fantastic. Right, well, thank you so much for having me. I feel really privileged and honoured to be speaking tonight at the Women Ed Global Unconference. Thank you so much. A bit of pressure kicking off the conference, but hopefully you will find my talk useful. Like I said, I'm Nikki Arkenstall. I've been a senior leader for a number of years, and I am a part-time senior leader as well. So it can work, and it can work successfully. But today I'm talking about how we can make recruitment less biased. And the section we're talking about is about tackling the system, really. So just to start us off in the chat, could you have a bit of reflection about who is in your team at the moment? So if you think about first of all, if you're in a mat, or if you've got a CEO, if you'd just like to type in the chat, what is the gender of your CEO or the highest person in your organisation? What is their gender? If you want to type in the chat. So whatever organisation you're in, you want to type in the chat. So we've got mixture, male, women, female, woman, female CEO. It's just been replaced by a male. It's interesting. Male, female. Okay, so we've got a quite broad mix. So then if we think about organisations that have head of schools or head teachers, if again you'd like to type in the chat, what is the makeup of your head of schools or your head teachers in the organisations that you work in? So again, mixture of male, female, fantastic. only females, brilliant. Male in secondary and female in primary. And then if you just think about the makeup of your leadership team, so in those senior roles in the school or in the leadership roles in the school, what sort of the makeup? So is it mainly females? Is it mainly males? What's the makeup like in terms of the leadership team? And then if you think about governors, what would you say about the governors? Would you say they are mainly male, female? Again, what's the makeup of that? So got a very range there. We can have a look in the chat at that. It's nice to see that 50-50 is coming through a lot. Within my own organisation, we are a primary school. We have got a quite high proportion of male teachers. We've got 4 teachers, but all our leadership team are female, which is fantastic. And our governing board are about 50-50 male and female. So just interesting there to see those. So thank you very much for engaging with the chat. So in terms of the next section, it's what does the research tell us? So what does the research tell us about diversity? So it tells us that women get paid less than men. It tells us there are a lot less women CEOs on boards and in senior positions, and that bias can affect recruitment. So obviously that all tells us that change is needed. Again, if we look at the research, overall, averagely, there's a 20% pay gap between men and women. And this, you know, is totally wrong, because obviously in the Equality Act and in the law, men and women should be getting paid the same amount for doing the same roles. There are fewer women hold higher paying senior leadership positions in schools, colleges and universities. And women who gain senior leadership roles are paid less than men. The education sector is ranked 3rd in the UK league tables of sectors with the largest gender pay gap. And overall, school primary average salary for principal for a male is roughly about £10,000 more than a female. So we really do need to do something to address this gap. Also, if we look at the makeup of women leaders overall in terms of research, then women only hold 17% of board directorships in global companies, and they only hold 21% of board seats. And, you know, only 6 out of 15 industries evidence female CEOs in their top 10 companies, so less than half. And only 55% of private companies and 40% of public companies did not consider women candidates at all when filling their most recent board seat vacancy. And 2%, when it's an all-male board, considered 2 or more women, and only 81% did not consider a single woman at all. So it's really important that we address this, that there are more women leaders on the boards. And I've done a blog about the research that goes behind that, and the link's there if anyone did want to read more about that, those particular figures. But I think it's important that we improve that recruitment on boards. The research showed that the boards that had more women, they had an increase in innovation and creativity. So it's getting that understanding about the benefits of having a diverse board can make for organisations. So again, in the chat, if you just like to have a think, if we're thinking about recruitment, if you're recruiting in your organisation, are you biased? So if you'd like to just put in the chat yes or no, or whatever your thoughts are you biased if you're carrying out any recruitment? Do you think you'd have any biases? If you'd like to type it in the chat, what do we think? Are you biased? So we've got hope not. Anybody else? So I have to fight hard against my biases, absolutely. Would hope not, but maybe subconsciously try not to be. I like to think not, but reckon we have. Almost certainly. I try not to be, but I think I might be at times. That's right. I'm going to go on to talk about unconscious bias. People are picking that up, so thank you. So that's interesting. If we think about are we biased, obviously we'd all want to give the answer, hopefully, if we're on this call tonight, that we haven't got any conscious biases. But the cognitive research shows that we are all biased. Okay, unconsciously we are biased, and it's actually our brain is trying to help us out, because cognitively we can't take in everything that's going on in our environment. It'd overwhelm our brain, so our brain kicks into place things to help us and support us with that, so that we're not overwhelmed. And you can see there's a cognitive bias codex. They've done lots of research about all the unconscious biases that exist, and as you can see there are hundreds, far too many to see there. But again, the link's on the bottom there if anybody wants to look at that in more detail and look at those, and you can click on each link and it talks about what those biases are. But roughly you can put them into 4 general categories. So our brain, when we've got too much information, it filters out things, and it takes away information and only gives us things that it thinks is important and useful. But actually, when we're doing recruitment, it might take out things that are useful and important, and it could be detrimental in terms of getting the right candidate for the job. What it picks up on is repeated things, funny things, things that change, and things that confirm the biases that already exist in our brain and our conscious. In terms of not enough meaning, so if it doesn't have enough meaning from the environment, it makes up its own stories and it imagines details, and it works on assumptions in that section. And there it says the familiar, the better, and our brain seems to think if it's familiar to us, then it's better, and that's how our brain sort of processes that information. Needing to act fast, so if we need to make a decision quickly, then again, obviously it's good for us because we need to make fast decisions sometimes to help us. But again, in recruitment, that can be bad because we can jump to unfair conclusions. And it goes again on assumptions. It looks at past data that's in your brain, and it goes on what is relatable to it. And then in terms of what we should remember, it looks at what is simple and complete, and it doesn't like complex and ambiguous options, and it only picks out the key elements, and it discards specifics and edits and removes memories. And again, that can be really negative in terms of recruitment if it's not picking up those things that can make sure we get the right candidate for the job. So what does the research show us? That there's some conscious biases coming through, or possibly conscious bias. So when they sent out CVs, and the only thing that the CV was exactly the same, the only thing that was different on it was the name and the photograph. When obviously it was the first photo, she got 19% success rate of being called for an interview. When the name changed, the surname changed, it was only 14%. And when the photo changed, it was only 4%. And that really did show that bias for females wearing headscarves in terms of that research. And the link is there so you can see the source of that research. Also, looking at Anglo-Saxon names, anybody who hasn't got an Anglo-Saxon name in the research they carried out here had to input 60% more applications in an Anglo-Saxon name and have 8 more years experience to have a successful callback to interview. So it really does show those biases are coming through in the recruitment process. So what can we do? We need to disrupt, we need to make a change. So the first step is to identify and become aware. It's about accepting that we do have these unconscious biases. Labeling our bias is essential to recognize that our inclinations are often not objective. Okay, and what we need to do once we've realized that is take action and design guards. It's about designing new systems to decrease that bias. Willpower alone is not enough. Like we said, we all on this call would not want to have that bias, but that isn't enough because our brain kicks in and it takes over from us. So we need to introduce systems to reduce that bias. So one of the ways we can address the pay gap, which obviously Vivian said is a passion for herself, is auditing the gender pay gap within our organisation. Also, like Vivian said, it's important to take that question off the application, not asking what their previous pay scale was. But then once you've done an audit in your organisation, you can then produce an action plan to address if there are any gender pay issues. And there are 2 links there of some good examples of an audit and an action plan that you can use to, as a starting point for your organisation if that's something you feel that you might want to take part in. Another thing we can do in terms of getting more women on boards is about, again, making people know about the different outcomes. So it's the same process for getting women on board, but there's very different outcomes, and that's because of the unconscious and the conscious biases. And it's about letting people recognise the benefits of having the women on board. Research shows clearly that, they are more innovative, more creative, the more women we have on boards. So it's about considering a larger number of candidates. Okay, again, all male boards tend to only have a lot fewer candidates that they even look at. Connect with membership organisations for women and professional associations for women to see if there's anybody that is suitable for the roles. I think we can think of a good one here today in terms of Women Ed and connecting with them and their links of who they've got for people that may suit a role in an organisation. Making sure policies are clear about how you're going to make your recruitment unbiased in your organisation. It's about expanding that pool of candidates. Again, like I said, women boards with women on tend to have a much broader pool and in a much diverser pool of candidates. And it's about consulting women colleagues for referrals as well. Research has shown that women know 7.6 women who've got the right qualifications to suit a role, whereas men only know 2.3. So again, it's making sure you're speaking to women about who could we have in our organisation, who would be a good fit for this role. And it's staying on the lookout for promising candidates, even when you haven't got a role available, so that you have got that broader pool to pull on. So what can we do to avoid recruitment bias? So we can utilise behaviour science here. Again, expecting people to change isn't going to happen. We need to change the environment and the structures and systems that are in place in the recruitment. The example here, you know, we all know and want to eat a healthier diet. We all want to eat 5 a day. And we can all say that and think that. But unless we put systems in place, like the plate with the different sections to make sure we're having the right amount in each section, then, you know, it doesn't happen. It slips through and things happen. So it's about putting those systems in place. So we can start right from before we even send our job advert out, in thinking about the role, in thinking about the job descriptions that we send out, and in terms of our adverts, because we unconsciously associate some words with gender. Too many gender-coded words can turn people away, an unintentional signal that they don't belong. So there's some examples there of words that we unconsciously associate with masculine and feminine. So the more neutral words we can use, or a mixture of those words, make sure that people don't read the advert and think, oh, that job's not for me. Okay, making sure again we get the bigger pool of candidates that we can. Another really good way of reducing bias is to anonymize applications and CVs. So get your admin team, before it goes to the people who are doing the shortlisting, to remove that data, that, you know, the names, the photos, so that the people who are shortlisting are going off the skills and the, you know, the specifics that will really support that job, rather than, you know, seeing the name. Again, it might not be doing it consciously, but unconsciously, you know, if you read the name first, it could detriment the way that you read the application. So it's really important to anonymize applications and CVs. Another way we can do it is through structured decisions and grading systems. So when we are shortlisting, having our grading systems so that people know what are we going to give different points for, what are we going to be looking for on those application forms, and then having standard rubrics for grading applicants throughout the process. So if there's a task that they're completing, you know, you've got a model answer and how many points you'd give for the different varying answers you'd give. If it's interview questions, again, thinking about what you'd want those answers to be and what scores you would give for the different answers. Again, it just makes it a much fairer system to have those rubrics and grading systems in place. It's also important to reduce rank order bias. So I know when I'm shortlisting, I've got a pile full of applications to fill, to look at. You know, you can get fatigued when you look at them, and the first ones you look at, you spend more time reading them in detail, and obviously as it gets further down the pile, and your time slipping past, you could skim through those. So it's important not to do that, because that's where the bias can come in. So it's about randomizing the interviews, the screening orders, the work samples, about having breaks, so making sure the interviews happen when people are rested. And it's about reducing that cognitive overload, reducing those back-to-back decision making, so people aren't cognitively overloaded, and that quick win bias setting in terms of just making those quick decisions. In terms of what's predictability of assessment methods, the research has shown that actually getting people to do a work test, and so doing part of the job or the role that they'll be doing when they come, is actually the best way of getting the best candidate in that role. And also structured interviews. So work samples are great because they test the skills directly. They are, again, agreed criteria. You can get a number of people to grade the work, and again, anonymize those so they don't know who's done the task. So they're just grading it again on the skills that they're seeing. I interviewed some teaching assistants a couple of weeks ago, and again, in interviews, some of them came out really strongly in terms of their answers. But when I got them to read the reading group and actually see them doing the skill that I'm going to need them to do when they're in my school, it was a very different picture. So it really did show me who was the best candidate for all that role. So it's a fantastic way of seeing who is the best person to interview. And also having structured interviews ensures a fair process. If they have the same questions, if they take notes and have a consistent measurement, compared to if we have different questions, no notes, no rubric, and that gut feeling, that's where those unconscious biases can fit in. So it's really important to have structured interviews and having that accountability in your organisation where your stakeholders talk to you about how are you making your recruitment unbiased, what are you doing, what processes and systems have you got in place to ensure your recruitment isn't biased. So that's what leaders can do. What can we do if you're a job seeker to look at bias in recruitment? So you can research what process does the organisation use for recruitment that you're applying to, and prioritise those organisations that do use unbiased methods. Look at the team that's there and see if their recruitment is not weeding out their unconscious biases. If it's a carbon copy of the employer, then obviously they're not being diverse and inclusive recruitment processes. And dig into that culture. How do they market themselves? Have a look at them on their newsletters, in the social media, and what do they talk about in their values? Do they talk about having equal opportunities, inclusion and diversity, and see if that's a culture that fits your values and aligns with you. And remember, it's not always you, it's them. Okay, it can be soul destroying when we don't get a job that we really want, but really take comfort knowing that it's obviously not the right place for you. And don't let it knock your confidence for any future roles or your future job searches, and just, you know, move on and try again for the next role and use it as a learning tool. So in terms of next steps then, if again you'd like to have a type in the chat, what are you going to do in your organisation, or what could you do in your organisation to make recruitment less biased? After hearing the talk today, is there anything that you might want to look into or think about how you can make your recruitment less biased? Okay, and there are some really fantastic resources linked here. Oh, great, so someone's going to anonymise the tasks. That's brilliant. Thank you, Kendra. So we're going to so there is a link there to resources. Be applied, do lots of fantastic training on how to unbias and it's free. So they do lots of days training that are free about how to unbias your recruitment processes. They've also got a number of webinars on the website. So if it is something you're interested in, that is a really good resource to go to. So someone's, okay, thank you. We need to remove salary details. And Michael, I've never really thought about anonymising of tasks. I'll have to speak to our HR director. Fantastic. Thank you, Louise. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, then I'm welcome to do them. But thank you so much for having me. I hope you found that useful. Please remember to use the hashtag WomenEd. And if you would like to connect with me, then my Twitter name is @ArkinstallNikki. But thank you so much. I hope you found that useful.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Nikki. What a kind of full on and phenomenal start to our session today. Just you know, in terms of your strategies, what one thing would you do? Do you think of all of them?
When we had our new school manager come in, she really looked at all our processes and she really got it in line. And the main thing I think that has moved us on is having those tasks, and also when we're doing the interviews, we have a really clear rubric. So we have what our answers would be. So this is a 1-point answer, this is what a 2-point answer, a 5-point answer, and so we all clearly are marking to the same grid and rubric, so there's no sort of bias that can come in place, because we clearly know before the interview what we're going to be giving the scores for, and that has really helped to just make it a really fair process, I think, in my organisation.
Brilliant. Yeah, because of course those tasks can often throw people, can't they? And can really mark the difference. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Nikki. If you could stop sharing your screen, that would be awesome. And of course, if there are any questions, if there are any questions or anything for Nikki, then please do share those, or continue to share those in the chat. That was a fantastic session. So we're moving on now, because of course time is always precious on our unconferences. And we're moving on to Kendra Brownlee-Less, is it, I think, who is going to be talking to us about developing a critical knowledge of leadership. Now, she has come from the Northeast, the UK. So another UK speaker. Hi, Kendra. And it's Brownlees, isn't it? I got that wrong. I'm so sorry. And she's a VP, Vice Principal at a school in the Northeast. She's passionate about empowering others to develop their confidence in their leadership skills. So, and you're in your final year of your doctorate. How do you have time?
I don't. I really don't. I struggle. But it's something I'm so passionate about, so I just have to try and make time.
Well, it's fantastic. And of course, this session is focused on your research. So hand over to you. Please feel free to share your screen.
Oh, great. I'm just going to share my screen, so I hope you can see it. Share screen there. I'm hoping you can see it there.
Yes, we can, Kendra.
Oh, wonderful. So very quickly, I'll just go straight in and start. The session is based on sort of 4 years worth of research, but then putting it all together to think about, well, what can we do to really empower people and women to have a voice? Because what I would like us to do today is to disrupt the mindset of women who feel that they can't participate fully in meetings. I've noticed that the more widely that I've read around the subject, the more that I can see that there's not enough women putting themselves forward. And the whole point of my thesis, I've focused in on the underrepresentation of women at secondary level in SLT positions. And this is what I would like to disrupt. This is what I would like us to do tonight, to think about, well, what can we do ourselves to make sure that we've got that confidence to disrupt the narrative, so we've got more women putting themselves forward in the first place for any form of promotion within primary, secondary, higher education. So the aims of this session really to have a critical knowledge for leadership, so you can hold your own in a meeting, contribute without reservation, and allow your valuable voice to be heard. So what I would like us to do before we do anything really is just to think about it first. Copy that in the chat, please. What qualities do you think an inspirational leader should have? And you can put as many as that you'd like in the chat function, but what qualities would you look for in an inspirational leader? So integrity, wonderful. Humility, that's one of mine that I've put on. Integrity again. Empathy, vision, energy, honesty, supportive, trust. Someone who's happy to be challenged. Vision, inclusivity, empathy, definitely, support, courage, bravery. So all of those things are absolutely crucial. And when we're thinking sometimes about growing our own confidence and giving ourselves that voice to put ourselves forward and to be 10% braver, and to have the courage and the conviction and the bravery to put ourselves forward, sometimes we forget about those qualities and actually thinking about how important they are for us to almost go back a little bit and then to give ourselves an analysis and evaluation on where do we stand then with our confidence levels and how could we grow them. So what I mean by that is, on the next slide here, moving further on, where do we sometimes then stop and take that moment to think about, actually, out of those huge range of qualities, which ones am I really good at and which ones do I think that I need to be better at? So if it's actually humility, then what can you do then to make sure that you're better at being more humble within your practice? Or if it's visionary or strategic, what can you do to make sure that you're more strategic? Or, as Careful has just said then, critical reflexivity. You know, we all know that these are the things that we look for in other leaders. Are we making sure that we're giving ourselves the time to stop and reflect on our own sort of leadership capacity in our evaluation of self, to then give ourselves the time that we can work on aspects of our own leadership? So with that in mind, what I would like to do to really for this session is to focus on ways that we can grow our own confidence, so that when we're going and putting ourselves in these important meetings, it could be for governance. I've recently become a MAT trust governor, and I'm sitting there with lots of people who are highly experienced governors of a MAT board, and I've come along onto the trust board, and I've got all of this breadth of experience. And in this situation, I'm not as confident as what I would normally be. And I think that's something that we can sometimes lose sight of. we think that because we're SLT, then we've got to make sure that we're confident and we've got to be that role model constantly. But actually that confidence is a wavering scale. We might be really confident when it comes to presenting on teaching and learning. We might be really confident if you are somebody who runs deep support within your school, but in actual fact that you might put yourself forward and that might not be your area of expertise. So what can you do to make yourself more confident when you're putting yourself out there? Because that's what we need to do. We need to disrupt women having a voice and putting ourselves forward. So we've got role models for diverse leadership. We've got role models because we've got women from all backgrounds, all diverse, racial makeup, everything, so that we're paving the way to see that women can do this. And I wanted to say as well, this may not be for you. You might be sitting there today thinking, great, I'm super confident in lots of aspects of sort of my professional leadership. It might be that some of the messages I'm going to share now could be for somebody else, a woman that you know that you want to mentor, a woman that you're going to coach to then put herself forward. So these are just 5 sort of easy things that we can do to make sure that we're growing our own confidence, that when you're in a meeting, when you're in that situation, you can develop your confidence. So the first thing, I've got a purple tree because I thought I'm going full out for Women's Ed tonight and everything's purple. So I've got a purple tree to really take this metaphor of growing confidence. It's not something that's static. It's not something that's predetermined and it's just there, you either got it or you haven't. And I hear lots of women that I speak to when I coach women as a vice principal who say, oh, well, I'm not a confident person. And what I try to say to them, actually, again, that confidence is a sliding scale. You're more confident in aspects of your life than you are in other aspects of your life. And you've got to grow that confidence. It's something that we've got to work at. And if we go back to the point that I made earlier, I really wanted everybody to think about, what do you look for in an inspirational leader? And for those qualities, do you take time for yourself to develop them within you? So that little bit of reflection as well. So the first thing I want to say to grow your confidence is this: it's knowledge. So we often say to our pupils and we say to our students, if you want to get better for a specific exam, you've got to know more. And it's the same for ourselves. It could be that you're going to put yourself forward for some CPD. I think it's wonderful that Nikki said that she's doing the masters that's involved with women's education. That's the reason that I started my doctorate in leadership, because I wanted to grow my confidence to be able to go for a position of principal, because that's what I would like to be at secondary level. And I knew that I needed to have the knowledge and the expertise and the understanding of different aspects of leadership to be able to do that. So invest in yourself. Take the time to think, what out of my job, what out of leadership that I really need to work on. So when I go to that meeting, I'm prepared and I've got an idea of what it is that I would like to talk about, because lots of women in meetings can sometimes sit back. And what I've found in my research, it's that men who dominate the conversation. In conferences, it's men who are asking the questions and then they're getting lots back in return. So make sure you look around for some CPD so then you feel more confident to be able to contribute. Again, what I've just said there, that men are dominating conferences, and not in terms just of makeup and that 70% of the speakers on the panels are men or 80%, but in terms of the men who then, when it comes to the audience, it's the men who are putting their hands up. So do some research in advance to make sure that you've got some questions, you've got some background knowledge, so you feel that confidence to be able to speak. Matthew Said, who writes a lot about leadership, talks about divergent thinking. And just to, sorry to sort of digress into the football, but I don't know if anybody saw the article about Gareth Southgate in the Euros, and the reason we came so far this year is because he utilised expertise from different fields. So instead of taking all football leaders and having this echo chamber where all the football experts were saying the same thing, he prioritised expertise from different fields. So he had a colonel from the army, he had somebody from the NHS, he had a rugby coach, he had somebody who worked on the Olympic Forum. And it was wonderful because what he said is those experts from different fields were bringing in valuable skills and attributes that he could utilise and learn from and put in place in terms of football. So I really think that, think about with yourself, you may not be the expert for a pastoral or attendance, but actually if you've been primarily based in teaching and learning, you can still bring important ideas to the table using Matthew Said's divergent thinking. So we don't want echo chambers, we want as many diverse sort of experiences and backgrounds as possible. Thank you, Pam. The Rebel Ideas is so good for understanding that group success. So thank you for sharing that. The second point then is strategy and direction. You're thinking about growing your confidence. And I like what Nikki's just said then about putting systems in place. And that's what I mean by this, thinking about the direction that you're going in, thinking about strategies and systems in place to be successful. So when you go to a meeting, you have your short, your medium, and your long-term goals with clear objectives. You are much more likely to contribute at an SLT meeting with powerful voices that can sometimes dominate if you know that you are organised and that you know the direction of where you would like to be with whatever idea or project that you've got. Make sure that you've got checkpoints to ensure success and share those yourself. Try not to wait for seniors to say to you, can you give me an update? Go to a meeting already with checkpoints to say, can I just give everybody an update on this? And the more you practice that, the more comfortable you will feel at contributing in a meeting to be able to then do that organically of your own accord. And then the last one is for this one, is just to make sure that you've got regular, clear communication. Share your ideas and share your thoughts with your team. And not only so then you've got that, I always say that if you share an idea in front of an SLT team or whatever team that you're working on, you're more likely to go through with it. But just so as well, there's an awareness of direction. So the second one is strategy and direction. The third one, and this one, I liked what Kezia said at the beginning, we've got to think about why do we do this? The whole point of us, all of us being together tonight in this forum is to think about how we can impact education for the lives of pupils. It's the students that we do this for. So if you ever find yourself at a meeting and you're thinking, oh, I really want to say this, but I don't feel like I've got the confidence. Think about actually the big picture. It's pupils behind that, and they deserve somebody with a voice who's going to be able to then put themselves forward to do that. So think about the big picture, and that should always give you the confidence that you need. And then not just that, though, think about being a role model to other people. And I've mentioned that previously. We've got to pave the way for younger women from all backgrounds to show that they can make to senior leadership positions and that it can be done. One thing I have that I sort of try to play down when people say this, they'll say, oh, you're a governor, you're a vice principal, you're doing a doctorate, you're superwoman. And I say, no, I'm not superwoman. It's not superwoman. It's just, I'm very, very passionate about what I do and I want to make a difference to pupils' lives. So that's how I would sort of get around that when I feel sort of maybe not as confident in the meeting. And then the other one, it came quite up a lot of the times at the beginning when I asked in the chat, it's authenticity. So when you've got that big picture and you're thinking about doing it for the pupils, make sure you're doing it in a way that's true to yourself. Because I see a lot of the times at SLT meetings, people who try to emulate the way other leaders behave. And actually that's quite exhausting. So stay true to yourself, have a voice, believe and have the courage to disrupt the narrative that we've currently got right now and put yourself forward in an authentic way that's true to you. The other one that I was going to say is just about empowerment of other people. you've got to make sure that you're looking for opportunities to then bring other people with you on board. And that's one thing I'm hugely passionate about: mentoring, coaching, looking for the strengths of other people on your team, particularly women, and bringing them in and saying, actually, let's grow our confidence together and let's work on something together. Let's collaborate and look for opportunities for other people and putting other people forward. And actually, the confidence that you'll get yourself when you can see the difference that you're making to somebody else's leadership journey will have a huge sort of growth for your own confidence to keep doing that. And that not only builds for a happy culture and a happy environment, but it's about making sure that we empower everybody on our team, look for strengths, celebrate successes, and making sure that we have that opportunity for other people to come on board leadership and to learn and to develop, so that they can believe that they can do it in the first place. I think the first time Vivian heard me speak, I was talking a lot of the things that Nikki has already discussed about what my research had found, and how women will look at a job specification and they'll go, oh, I don't meet that criteria. I don't meet that. I don't meet that. I don't meet that. And they've got to think that they've got to actually do it. Men, on the other hand, they just think, oh, well, I do 50% of it, but I'll put myself forward and I'll learn the rest on the job. And I think that's what I mean by empowering others, giving people the opportunities, exactly what Pam just said, to lift and rise others so that they can believe they can do it too. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is resilience. I've never put myself forward to talk at an event as big as this. So this is something I practice myself tonight. But what I would like to say is, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're worried about speaking up and you're worried about having a voice, I would like you to disrupt the narrative and embrace and acknowledge your fear. I've heard a lot about anxiety being a negative and that anxiety isn't a good thing. Well, without anxiety, we'd be reckless. Without anxiety, that people would have no fear of upsetting anybody, and we just have chaos in the world. And I do feel like there's a time and a place to just say, yep, I know I'm nervous. Yes, I know that I'm worried about this, but that's a good thing. And thank you, anxiety, for showing yourself. Thank you, fear, for being there. But I'm going to park you and I'm going to put you to one side, because this is something that is important to me. And I really want to share this. And I really want to just put my voice out there, because ultimately the pupils deserve somebody to speak up, and this is important that my voice is heard. We're allowed to make mistakes. So sitting around a table, always think it's okay. You might not say or articulate it in the best way that you would like to, and that's all right, because we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for perfection, and we're just wanting people to sit around that table and really, to quote Sheryl Sandberg, to have a seat at the table. So we've got to make sure that people see that seat is fun to be around, and actually we're looking for growth and we're looking for innovation and ideas. And I'm going to end on this one: self-kindness. Be kind to yourself. You know, you do the best that we can do, and that's enough. So I just wanted to end on that one with self-kindness, and just those are my 5 thoughts for sort of critical knowledge for leadership and gaining and developing confidence. And the last thing I would just to end with, really, just a quote from Kamala Harris, who's absolutely an inspiration. While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last, because every little girl watching tonight sees that this is a country of possibilities. And absolutely, we need to see a diverse range of female leaders, because we need the next generation of young women to be empowered to think, I can't do that. And then Sheryl Sandberg, I don't want to hear I'm not ready to do that, to thinking, I want to do it, and I will learn by doing it. And that is just it from me. So I just wanted to leave it there and just say thank you all for listening. It's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to talk tonight to everybody.
That was absolutely amazing, Kendra. Gosh, I feel so inspired by your final words there. And I'm sure, like all the others watching, just couldn't stop scribbling stuff down. There's some really, really helpful advice, and really, really lots and lots of takeaways that people can act on. And I'm sure that if anyone's got any questions for Kendra, they can add them in there. I mean, I thought your point about mentoring and empowering others was so important. And I actually, it made me think of somebody who kind of saw that in me and mentors me, and just how amazing I think she is. You know, she completely inspires me, and I think that's what we do when we help each other out like that. So thank you so much, Kendra, and well done on your first Unconference presentation.
Thank you everybody. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we're actually surprisingly not too bad on timing. So this is a first for a women-led Unconference, which is fantastic news. Now, one of the highlights of last year's Unconference was having sessions that were spoken in native tongue. And it really was a sheer joy to celebrate our global community in that way. And last year we had Women Ed Northern Ireland speaking and getting involved in that. And we also had the ladies from Women Ed MENA, that's Middle East and North Africa Women Ed Network. And they really were fantastic. And so we're delighted to have them back this year for our first network showcase of the weekend. And they, I'm hoping, oh, they are here. Is that right? Are we all here? Excellent. We've got a presentation up. And yeah, I'm going to hand over to the women of MENA.
Hello, can you hear me all right, Pam?
Yes, Esther. Hey,
okay, brilliant.
How are
Hi.
you? Right?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Lovely to see you.
I'm actually at the airport, so I may have to mute. I'm really sorry for the background noise. I'm had to multitask, and it's been a long story. So bear with me. I'm so sorry for if there's any background noise at the moment.
No worries. I mean, we've had a car, we've had an airport. I mean, hey, let's see where else we can go.
But let me introduce ourselves. Thank you so much, Pam. So we just, I'll introduce us all. So my name's Esther. Thank you for having us. I'm a middle leader in Oman and I work in Muscat. We have Rania here from Qatar University, and we have Zainab here, who's a deputy head at UAE as well. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about our region first before I hand over. We have a very large region. North Africa and the Middle East, which covers a lot of countries in a very, very large area. And we're expanding our network to make sure that we're trying to reach as many people, as many women as we can across the network. We really wanted to make a point of the MENA region just being very free. When we look at the MENA region network of Women's Ed, we make sure that we don't look at conflicts and any political issues, and that's a very important feature of us, because we want to focus on unity and working on supporting women rather than looking at any political issues that we have. So that's quite important that we state that when we're doing our work. So we wanted to share some of the challenges that facing women in the region, and these are not unique to the MENA region. But there's a lot that will cross over to other areas as well. So we have fear of failure, lack of self-confidence and self-bias, cultural concepts between males and females, financial issues as well, disparities in pay between men and women, lack of professional awareness and projects that are available or going on. Balancing various responsibilities has always come up as well as a challenge. Social pressures to get married and have children as a priority over a career or development of your career has been a challenge, and living in a closed community that may not show the opportunities. And as I said, these are not exclusive to the MENA region. Many other networks may face some of women that are facing some of these as well. So one thing that's been a real challenge for us, and again, I think this may be for other networks as well, is that Twitter is not a popular social media in the MENA region, and it's been quite difficult to get people onto Twitter. So we do use Instagram and Facebook to communicate, but Twitter, obviously, as we know, is so great for networking and CPD opportunities. So we're really trying to get as many women as we can onto Twitter and sharing and networking. So we collaborated with Linda and Philippa, who are based in the UAE. I think Philippa's just moved to China though, but we created a workshop that just looked at how to set up to your Twitter account, and this will be going on as well. So we showed women and how to format your account, how to make sure that you saw what you wanted to see, etc., and just make sure that was really clear and a safe place for you to be in. So we want to continue that work as well and make sure that we're reaching as many people as we can. And we wanted to share the different needs that come across in our region as well in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to hand over to Zainab, who's just going to have a little chat about some of the different needs that the women in our region have shared with us.
Okay, thank you, Esther. So we have identified various needs for women and educators in the MENA region, such as languages, the motherhood culture, homesickness, practical teaching strategies. So we'll start with the languages. So there are more than 60 languages in the region. Most of the languages are spoken in Middle East are native or regional, while others were introduced from other parts of the world. So it's not only Arabic, there are so many languages spoken here. Another one would be the family and motherhood and culture. So through our 10% braver sessions, our guests share their struggles with motherhood and the culture expectations from women. So the family is a very important part in the culture of the MENA region in the Middle East, and they mothers play a critical and a big role in the family, which is very powerful force for social cohesion and integration. And that puts mothers and educators in a huge dilemma of a life-work balance. Homesickness is next. So the MENA region and the Gulf especially is a great attention for expats from around the world. So leaving your mother home and going to work is just a common problem here. And you know, it can affect anybody. So educators in last year, so many people just quitted their jobs and went back home just because especially after the pandemic, because maybe they didn't see their families for 2 years, and also they might be affected financially. So some educators just feel isolated when they come to the Middle East. So we were trying to include everyone. So this is one of the problems that we found. Also practical teaching strategies, and I think this is a bit unique in our region. So many teachers join education, you know, like mothers, educators, they just join education to give them a bit of a balance in working hours and holidays. So it's most common that, you know, men will say, if you want to work, you can work as a teacher. So there's a culture pressure of expectations the community is expecting, as we highlighted before. So we start with the teaching. So there are no certain teaching degrees required if you want to enter some of the schools. So they are just like being teachers. They can find the certificate and appropriate professional training in the area. And then our ultimate goal is to expand our network and to support as many educators as possible in our region. Therefore, we reach out to and cooperate with other individuals, institutions, and whole schools. So every 2 months, we have a joint book club with Women at Canada, Australia, and UK. So this is one of the activities. Also, we're meeting with Women at Malaysia, and we have like a chat group on Twitter. And that's just to share experiences and new ideas with other networks. We have some amazing collaborators from the region, such as Zain Khan. So she has a professional development and educational recruitment, and she helped in many of our sessions. We have also Mink, she's a co-founder of Green Turnip Education, and Atiya from the Middle East. Esther, this would be the next one. Yeah. And Atiya, she's in the Middle East, and she's also she's very keen also to translate the Women Ed book, the first one. So actually, yeah, we're trying to expand our network as possible. And now I will hand more to Rania to tell you how did we expand it to universities.
Hi, everyone. We're so honored and pleased to have you. And Esther, please have safe flight, enjoy it, because I'm pretty sure that many of us would just like to travel anytime. Lots of work had been done and accomplished through our sessions, our activities, but it was not only for K-12, and we were so happy and delighted that we started this Unconference with lots of research. And that's why we also focused on participating in many conferences. So one of them was held in Turkey, and we were so pleased with the kind of engagement and activities, and we are hoping to add or to engage one of the members to be part of our leadership soon. So stay tuned for this. And it was interesting to have translation to Turkish, although that we're trying to learn some of the other languages. And story time. Please feel free to share your comments, questions within the chat, and especially after you hear the story. So we were planning to have lots of 10% waivers, and we were addressed by some of the members who had prepared a video for us, telling us about some of the concerns that they face as teachers. This is a 1-minute video, so please bear with us. Hear the voice, right? Can you hear the voice?
No, we can't, Rania. I think you might need to reshare, but just check that you've added the with audio.
Her object and her Miss Sara started teaching filled with enthusiasm and excitement. Since the very beginning, she graduated while she was waiting for the enter the class for her students and be greatest mission, which is shaping the career minds of her students. So much so, for her official appointment, she prepared with her objects and her slides in gifts for students to receive, and that working day by day only her love for her students and increase the student to her class every day. She has something new, she searches for, turns on Instagram, enters YouTube, and learns new programs. She never had any opportunity for any workshop that been a wonderful story, and of us feels that Sara represents her. Ready for the shock? The shock is that resigned after only 2 years. Decided to Sara represents her. Ready for the shock? The shock is that resigned after only 2 years. Decided to quit. Yes, actually left teaching. The profession was the dream of her life. This is Sara and many others, and you mentor them, or you thought you would be one of them. If you're a teacher, we would like to tell you 10% braver and come to share your experience and hear our experience in Women Eno.
So what do you think happened after they shared this video with us and they were ready to launch this event? Just give us some thoughts. Was it held? Was it successful? What do you think happened? Please share in the chat. Let's see how about change, disruption, innovation. So 2 hours before the event, I received a phone call from some of the guests telling me that their principal did not allow them to attend, and she threatened them to be dismissed if they join or even if they speak. There are lots of reasons behind that. Yes, wow. And they asked me to delay it or to postpone it and to have some actions. I said, no, that's not going to happen. We had plan B. One of the guests, she has a twin, and we asked her to join. We hosted. Yes, that was the case. And that reasoned us to raise a complaint to Minister of Education, to many organizations, and to many chapters here. So telling them that we need to understand the authority of the principals and how they can interfere, something that is very general. She's not talking on behalf of anyone. And we need to provide space or offer space for our teachers, even just, yep, you can just imagine what kind of challenge. That's why we were also focusing on bringing everyone on board and not only to focus on individuals. Yes, we want them to be 10% braver, but we also need institutions and we need also the community to be very supportive for this. So we had many sessions to bridge the gap between research and practice, and also to work with principals and to start with students, because we want them to be keen to start as early as possible. One of the sessions that we held, we were so lucky to have our amazing Vivian with us, talking about female education leadership in the MENA region, about researchers, how we can bring researchers and practitioners together, to hear some of the issues that Dr. Khalid Arar had been investigating about Arab women leaders and what kind of obstacles, and also to provide such a platform for other, let's say, supporters or educators to get on board and to support what's happening with the women. And some of the things that have been discussed during this session, that there are many culture issues. The cost of getting ahead, either that personal challenges, career challenges, and cultural challenges, as you had seen, related to the performance or even to the concept or the mindset of some people that they're working in education. And we're so sorry to have, still this kind of dialogue that we need to support our teachers, not only to sustain and to be 10% forever, but also to work with school principals and school leaders. And you will find that there are lots of things happening, either political issues, legal framework. It might be related to religion. It might be related to media perceptions. There are lots of things that we need to work on, especially in the MENA region. And that's not the whole story. I'm sure that some of you had heard of or read via Twitter about my daughter. She's year 5, 9 years old. When she applied this, she was, hearing me talking to my friends and, thinking and attending some of the sessions. And she asked me, "Can I apply, Mama?" I said, "Yeah, definitely." But I didn't thought that she would take it seriously, though. She applied this, and I'm sure that you can read the creativity and innovation within her handwriting. And I had been requested to present about leadership, and I asked her to record a video for her colleagues. Also, listen for her less than a minute.
Hello, my name is Rosal. I am very pleased to talk to you all about Womanhood. I have been a member for about a year and felt my confidence grow faster and faster. I have joined because I want everyone in the universe to become 10% braver. Although you are automatically 10% braver, you still need to continue your journey by doing some things like volunteering in activities or participating in events, for example, the student council, or share some fun activities with your class. And don't forget to be creative in every moment you have.
And now I hand to you, Zainab. Thank you.
I think Esther is still online. Esther?
Hello, my name is Rosal.
Yep, I'm still here. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, I've managed to stay online. Yes. Thank you so much. So we just wanted to share what our next steps were. So as Rania mentioned, we were looking at individuals and institutions further down the line. So for the individual, we were looking a lot at career progression, supporting the women in our region and how they can plan their next steps, writing CVs and interview skills and having workshops that can support women with that. Looking at Arabic and Islamic studies, getting over imposter syndrome, and then supporting people who are moving countries as well within the region or perhaps to the region as well. So the next slide, please. Thank you. And then we also wanted to look at whole school through leaders as well. So we want to support people being brave enough to become leaders and take that next step, but also how we can support leaders within the schools that they're in and how they can support women within those schools. So increasing support for them, looking at shared events and sharing resources and ideas and expanding networks through that as well. And then it was the institutions, the bigger picture, having, making sure we're growing an awareness of women ed across institutions, using those networking platforms and formats, using coaching to support and linking research to practice, which was really important to support that. And in the future, what we'd like to start Women Ed with students younger, and also look at how we can support student teachers in university leadership projects as well, and enabling them to explore Women Ed and how Women Ed can support them along their journey too. So thank you. I think we've got some questions, or we want to see if anybody had any questions. And we wanted to leave this quote as well. So each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it, possibly without claiming it, she stands up for all women. And I think that's a really, really great quote for us to leave on. But if anyone has any questions, it would be absolutely lovely to hear from you guys, or any comments or suggestions. What would be our advice to other networks? our advice would be, I guess, to look at your network and find out the needs of your network, but also to support with other networks as well, and how we can support each other, because I think that's great, sharing what's worked well, and also sharing if we do need any help with any other, any advice. So like I said, we've teamed up with Malaysia, and it's just having those conversations, teaming up and listening to each other and seeing how we can find out if we can support each other, or we can collaborate on amazing events like this as well. Thank you so much.
I would like to add, Esther, that they need to be connected to their communities and to understand their needs. And that's something that we also have been dynamic with, providing every session to be translated in Arabic or to have different languages as much as we do, and we hear from them about what's exactly required.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Rania. Absolutely.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Esther, Zinab, and Rania. That really was phenomenal. It's funny, isn't it, when we think about a different context of women ed and how easy it is to have these kind of conversations in the UK, but actually there's a real challenge in some of our communities, and that real kind of sensitivity to cultural context is absolutely key, isn't it? How you've done amazing things in the Middle East and North Africa in terms of building up your network. What do you think your kind of biggest, I'm not going to say biggest challenge, I'm going to say your biggest kind of strength has been?
Can I start?
Yeah, anyone can answer. I don't mind it.
We miss you, Natasha, by the way. Natasha, she started and she launched this with us. I think the way that we try to enjoy and to try different platforms in different ways, and also to work with organizations, as we had said, because we're trying to help everyone to find their voice. So as you had seen within the video, when they approached us and said that we have this idea, fine, let's do it, and definitely we can. So this flexibility of Women Ed is not only helping us as much as also providing for others. And another thing that I think we're really enjoying, having these kind of different issues, we're learning, we're growing, and I'm sure that behind every single obstacle that we face, we also, have lots of laughs and enjoyable moments that we also share.
And I think also one of our strengths is that we are from different countries and different like educational phases. So I'm an early years practitioner, Esther is primary, and Rania is in universities. So, this is giving also like a balance and a diversity in our approach. So we're trying to expand as much as we can. So yeah, and we're really enjoying it, yes.
And I think that's a real strength, because not many networks have that real mix of different stages, different experiences, and also different countries. So you are truly a local network, aren't you?
We didn't meet each other before.
Oh, I know, that's amazing, isn't it? You'll have to do that post-COVID. You'll all have to get together. Maybe Esther could stay in that airport and what is the story, Esther, by the way? Why are you in an airport?
Oh, it's just a complete last minute trip that I've managed to get away and get back to family. It's like my first time that I've traveled since COVID. So like 2.5 years I've not seen family. So it's just really exciting, and it just clashed with this, but couldn't be avoided. And I'm just thankful that I'm able to join you, and the internet stayed working and everything was good. So thank you so much for having us, Palm. It's been such a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And enjoy your trip home. I saw my family for the first time in 2 years or more, and it was just wonderful. So I'm sure you're going to have a very emotional weekend. It's going to be wonderful. Thank you, Zinab. Thank you, Rania. And we look forward to hearing from you again next year, I'm sure.
Definitely. I miss you guys too. And also, Esther, we're going to see you tomorrow, right? For our panel talk.
Yes,
perfect.
Looking forward to it.
You'll be in a different
I'll be in my destination. I won't be in an airport. I'll be good.
She'll have Wi-Fi.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. So I'm Natasha.
Yes,
where are we
absolutely. So we are now on to our next talk, and we have Jane Larson, who is the executive director of CIS. I'm hoping that she's going to pop in. And that is joint with Angeline Au, who is an international educator, learning development specialist, and I've just looked, potentially has taught in every continent. Would you say, Angeline? You've been everywhere.
Oh, not quite. I mean,
Almost.
I grew up in Australia and have taught in the Asia Pacific region, and I work now in Europe.
Yeah.
But yes, but my work where I go and visit schools and do a lot of work with schools has taken me across the globe, which is lovely.
Absolutely. So I'm really excited about this, and actually it's a really nice follow-on from Women Ed Men actually, because it's about being socially responsible leadership, building alliances, networks and structures. So super excited to hear this. I will let you guys take over.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen and ask that typical question. Can you all see it?
Yes, we can, Angie.
Excellent, perfect, wonderful. Yeah, so thank you very much for that kind introduction, Natasha. And I also work at Berlin International School. I'm the PYP coordinator in the upper elementary there. And I'm also working part-time for CIS. I just started a few months ago as an international advisor. And I am the country network leader with my team here at Women Ed DE. And so this is also our little Women Ed DE logo here. And I'm going to pass it over to Jane now to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be with you tonight. It's just wonderful to be here with so many women who are learning on a weekend. And I've been at CIS for about 10 years now as executive director and had the pleasure to work with a number of you and many other educators around the world. It's a continual learning experience, and I'm delighted to be here this evening to talk about how we as leaders can be mindful of our social responsibilities through alliances and structures.
So Jane, yeah, so, there was an inspirational point in time that, was really about your path to how socially responsible leadership that was really affirmed by an event. And so perhaps you'd like to share that story with us.
Yeah, I think we all have those moments in life that are profoundly meaningful. And it happened for me in 2020 when one of my colleagues, right after the George Floyd murder in the United States, published a blog. And it was a blog basically entitled, I am both the victim and beneficiary of international education. And he had reached out to me the night before he published it saying, gee, I just wanted to have you read this and find out if it would be possible to publish it. And when I read it, I immediately realized that after that murder, what we were thinking and feeling was completely different. And so not only did we publish it the next day, but we scheduled a call. And in those moments when I heard him describing his own reaction and what his lived experiences were, I started seeing things completely differently. And it was a catalyst for action at CIS. It changed me in that certainly racism isn't new, and it wasn't new to me, but it definitely moved me from being an observer and an empathetic observer, but an observer to someone to take action.
Thank you, Jane, for sharing what was a catalyst for you. And a lot of people are in the chat are saying that it's good to see you again. They know you, and anyone who does knows that you're a deeply caring person and an ethical leader. And for me personally, like being a person with an Asian background, a migrant moving from Malaysia to Australia, I experienced racism as a child in schools, and that's why I'm really quite passionate about how we raise social capital in our schools and in our institutions. And the stories can be what inspires us, but I think at its core too, we're talking about everyone's right to matter, as Lisa was sharing in the opening of this evening, that every child matters. And so our personal stories do help others build empathy, but also I think that we're not going to be able to we need to be able to move from just caring to taking some action in there. And so with that in mind, I think that, I'd love for you to share the groundwork that you took at CIS for moving into this anti-discrimination values that are driving it now.
Yeah, I tried to think about what would be meaningful, each of you listening in. And I think the big lesson that we learned is that you have to start with people, with individuals, before you move to systems and structures. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. It's like learning in school for students. You have to be emotionally engaged. It took that story for me to be emotionally engaged. So we started at CIS with stories. And, it's difficult. For example, one of our colleagues said, gee, my parents told me it's not polite to talk about racism. So when we think about multiple forms of discrimination against women, one way to start is in mixed audiences, to start with one story, and then gradually people started telling their own stories. But they also needed help. So the second thing we did is we went back to the basics, to terminology, to definitions, to give people a shared language to begin to gain trust as they talked about this.
And with those trusting relationships, we're able to develop alliances and build networks within CIS and the CIS membership community, in the same way that we just heard, Rania from MENA speaking about exactly this slide as she was sharing beforehand, and that there's an iterative relationship between all of these factors, because we have people with the mindsets who are a part of the organizational culture, right? And they're the ones that are involved in designing the systems that are in place. And so we heard this earlier this evening too about biases, right? So how are we then, with that mindset growing into being able to design equitable cultures? So we're going to share about each one of these with some reflection questions that we hope will help promote change as well, starting with the building mindsets and alliances. Jane.
Yeah, overall, really, this is a massive educational campaign. It's about helping people move from ignorance. I think we all know people who are actually unaware, oblivious to the fact that we need to talk openly about discrimination. It's uncomfortable, so a lot of people don't want to talk about it. But how do you get someone's attention again when they're completely ignorant to the fact that they actually need to take action about it? I was ignorant to that. I was empathetic, but I wasn't taking action. That's a big step forward. And then that's only the minimal level of engagement, isn't it? Ignorance. The next step, actually, when you begin to engage people, that's when fear and even anger come in. And that's a very difficult stage. And if you don't have confidence as a leader, it's very difficult when you're in that stage. People want to bail out at that stage. But as my colleague Nunana told me, actually, when it reaches that stage, that's a good thing. It means that you've got people talking about something that's very difficult. So what does discrimination look like in your community? That's a brave question to ask, and you have to be ready to facilitate those discussions and also deal with the fear and the anger that comes with it before you can move to readiness.
Thank you, Jane. And these sentiments are echoed, I think, in the chat. So Kay Fuller was sharing that, we need to move from sympathy to anger about injustice. And it goes from, building empathy through the storytelling that we have. And so, and I would like to challenge the audience here tonight to say, we can say that we care and we can have empathy and compassion, but do we actually really care if we're not taking that into action and doing something with it and actually working towards, moving from storytelling to actually taking action? And so how do the individuals in your community then take that work and make something happen and be 10% braver, as we're encouraging people to be this evening?
And I think the next lesson that we really learned was, again, this isn't work because it's so individual that can be led just from the top either. It's really about, as Angeline said, building alliances and identifying people through a distributed leadership model. So sometimes people who have those different experiences can make change a lot more effectively than leaders can. But again, you have to trust and really use a broader group of people in your community and identify people in your community who have a different story to tell than you have, or maybe the people you usually hang out with have. And I think that's why we find the stories are so different when you start to move into an affinity group that's different than your own. So it's really important to try to step out of again, your own team, your people, and tell these stories with other people as well.
And so, Jane, how have you used data to move and to help accelerate these the building of networks?
I think we talked about this. There was a really great organization, and I'm embarrassed, I can't remember their name, but they came up with this phrase, to use data not just to improve, but to move. And that really resonated with me because one of our immediate challenges was, okay, we have to do all this work to change our system and get the data to portray the lack of diversity. But we've done some great work in that way, that's for sure, publishing on differences in women's salaries in international education. But we have a bigger story to tell, and we don't have the systems set up to do it related to ethnicities. But you know what? We stopped and we said, if we really want to move, there's some things we just know. We don't have to wait for the data. We knew, for example, already our board of trustees wasn't as diverse as we wanted it to be. So we changed that through appointments. We also know that we have teams of volunteer evaluators on our accreditation teams that could be more diverse. Well, we can spend a year setting up the system and getting the data, but we can also go out right now to intentionally hold out our hands and recruit more diverse evaluators. So how can you use data in your own school community to move?
And we also know that through the affinity groups that you mentioned, Jane, that we're also getting what I like, what is street data, right? So we're all telling the same story. Yeah. So, BIPOC educators around the globe, we have an association of international educators and leaders of color. And I see some people in our audience today, like Kyra, who is a part of that group as well, and more. And the, through the telling of our stories, we know that isn't this data enough? And do we need data to say that, because X amount is happening, isn't it, if one person feels like they've been or has been discriminated against, isn't that enough? Like each and every one of us in our worth is there. And so I think that sometimes I think that do we have an over reliance also on the data, and sometimes the stories that we tell is also data. And when an anthropologist, Dr. Danao Tanu, makes a big point about that, and she also says that if it's 12 stories out of 1,000 kids, this is still really valid. And a part of her research that she has. So for me, it's like thinking about, when that I think is what Women Ed do really well. We all get together, we tell our stories. And so we have to think about who's in your street and how does that, in that your network really influence how you able to tell your stories and share that data on the street and make an impact. And
yeah.
And this
sorry.
So sorry, Jane. Yeah, and just wanted to build on that to say that we have equitable designs and thinking about compatibility, and so we're the ones who are making those systems and designing those tools, and so we have to think about what values are driving that, and that's where being socially responsible, thinking about how to tackle the unfair systems that we have, and thinking about how can you then really build inclusive and equitable systems and structures. So to ask yourselves, like, how are we doing this? And Jane, how is CIS then approaching this?
Yeah, so what was really important for us is that immediately we realized that we had to build trust, and that doesn't happen automatically. And so the board actually set up a committee of stakeholders, and we reached out to look into not only our staff, but our members, and to find diversity in our members to really share their perspectives, but also to challenge us and to hold us accountable. And they did, didn't they, Angeline? I mean, we realized early on there were a lot of questions I learned I couldn't take for granted that people trusted me. I had to prove it, you know, questioning what tools we were using, why this self-assessment. We went through a lot of discussions. I'm so grateful personally to Angeline, even for pointing out things at times that maybe I was taking for granted, but that others weren't, and I needed to work really hard. So using a distributed leadership model, I can't even begin to tell you how valuable a colleague you've been, Angeline, and others, you know, who have just been so forthcoming and proactive. It's just meant the world to me and made a huge difference in our work.
Thank you, Jane, for your kind words, but also it's because you've been a really great ally. So not only in promoting women in educational leadership, but also I think for me, it's also recognizing that for individuals of color, there is that in challenge that's added to that, and you recognize that the challenge is very intersectional as well. And so I think that like CIS, through its valuing of inclusivity through diversity, equity, and anti-racism, so the IDEA values, and having board approval of these values as well, I think that's been really a big shift, because then we're able to move forward in really strategic ways in order to build the structures that we need in order to help shape international education, which is really our mission. And yeah, Jane, maybe you could share also how CIS is doing this through the accreditation standards.
Yeah, well, we started immediately, as you mentioned, using our words carefully. We really are focused on creating an inclusive community, aren't we all? It's what we all want, is to belong and have close relationships with colleagues and people. So, you know, she cited the acronym Inclusion Through Diversity, Equity, and explicitly using the word anti-racism. But I would say at the systems level for all of you, think about the frameworks you have in your institution. Think about the tools you have. What are the levers that you can pull? Accreditation is a powerful lever for change, and there are a lot of eyes on it. We know that. There are a lot of expectations about using that lever in a important, in a useful and meaningful way. And a lot of times it can be seen as a compliance tool. But again, we all know that if you just put in systems and structures without people understanding why they're there, they don't work. So we also realize this has to be, as we said, a massive educational campaign first, and we will take a developmental approach because it's such an intensely personal work. We have to meet people where they are. We have a moral responsibility to do that. And the framework is useful to help people understand where they need to go. So this just breaks down a little bit the areas, just a few of them, in terms of how that's distributed. And I just want to point out also, they're really these concepts, these principles are woven throughout all the standards. They are not standalone. This is not work that's done in isolation. But again, it has to be embedded in everything we do. It's based on values that underpin, again, all of the policies, all of the practices, all of the systems, all of the structures.
Thank you, Jane. And yeah, I've been really pleased to join CIS, and because of the values that resonate with mine. And I think someone else brought that up earlier this evening too, when we're talking about recruiting and looking at, you know, where you want to go, where do you want to apply to for your next role, and how that's really important for us to find somewhere that we're going to be able to be our authentic selves and have our values in alignment with that. And I think we're, you know, Jane and I believe very strongly that we need socially responsible leadership to ensure that our designs are equitable, whether it be in an institution like CIS or in your own school, and that we can reflect on our actions, but as equally important, also our reactions to things. And sometimes our inactions are also our actions, right? So if I think there was a comment here calling out another institution saying, if you don't, you know, say anything and don't deal with it, that's actually going to send a really big message to others about what you believe in. And I think, like, you know, for us, it's always been something that we really want to try and disrupt and be able to think about how we can build cycles of, like, deal with the cycles of systemic injustice by building alliances, by building networks, and by building the systems.
Yeah, thank you all so much just for taking the time tonight to listen to both of us. We hope it was useful and helpful to you, and always ready to talk to anyone who's similarly trying to find the right entry point to this important conversations and work. Thank you all so much. Thanks so much, Angeline.
Thank you, Jane.
Jane and Angeline, thank you. It's funny actually, because I'm starting up DEI networks, and there's you've just heard from many how challenging things can be in the Middle East, and just by listening to this, I've already started to get lots and lots of ideas about how I could start to think about taking it forwards as well. Some of the key things that I know, like what happened to George Floyd was just so terrible, and it actually started so many difficult conversations. These conversations were happening anyway, but it really did get things going again, and that's definitely what's taken things forward, I would say, definitely for us in the Middle East as well, because it caused so much disruption, because children started to become really, really vocal as well, which was fantastic, because it meant that it wasn't just some people in the background. I think some of the key things that you said there was, you know, having these stories are just as important as having the data. And that's something that I've been advocating for loads. It's like, these stories are just as important. I don't need numbers or figures to prove it. Like, if, you know, like you've said, if it's 12 children's stories, then that is more than enough for it to be taken seriously. But it is listening to those stories, being empathetic with them, but actually, if you are empathetic and you do care, you need to do something about it, and not just listening and going, oh yeah, that's really, really, really sad. And that is such a key thing, definitely, that I've taken away from that as well. And then just the key thing there, you can put these stories out there, you can put them out into the, you know, into the world, but actually you have to then be ready for the repercussions of the challenge and the conversations that are going to happen, and the people that you do need to, you know, get on side as well, because that's challenging in itself. So yeah, I've taken lots away, just me, and I'm looking at all of the chats here, and there's just so much, and people really, really kind of resonate with everything that both of you have said. And I think as soon as we opened, Liz was like, oh wow, the powerhouse is here, and I was like, yes, really excited for this. And yeah, thank you, you've kind of like lived up to all of our expectations. I'm definitely taking lots away, so thank you Angeline, and thank you Jane, for spending some time this evening with us.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you to the whole Women team for a great start to the weekend, and I'm looking forward to enjoying the rest of the weekend as well.
Super. Okay, so our next person up is Emily Roseman. I'm just hoping that she's going to log in. Oh, hi, Emily.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm honestly quite nervous now to follow the powerhouse, but I'll do
well. No, Emily, you are just as much of a powerhouse. Emily is joining us this evening. She is VP at Large Academy in the UK. Obviously, I always say that because I'm international, so I always kind of say it's in the UK. And Emily this evening is talking about women leading on behaviour in an age of toxic masculinity. So we are all excited to hear. Are you ready?
Thank you. Yes, I'm hoping I can. I'm obviously going to do that thing. Can you see my screen?
I will stay on until I.
Yeah. Is that
yes, perfect. Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, right. I'll press present then. Lovely. So yes, yeah, thank you, as I said. So I'm talking today about women in non-behaviour in the age of toxic masculinity. The reason I chose this topic to talk about, so I recently became a vice principal at an academy in the centre of England, and when I took on that role last September in the age of COVID, one of the things I was tasked with leading on was around behaviour and pastoral, and it wasn't something I had a lot of experience with actually, but it was something that I was really keen to kind of involve myself in. And I quite naively went in thinking, well, I'm pretty good at behaviour in the classroom, so this should be a doddle. Anyway, turns out that wasn't necessarily the case. And so what I wanted to talk to you about tonight, and some of the kind of issues that I faced in terms of that, was around this issue of toxic masculinity. And I know it's come to the fore quite recently in the media in terms of what this might look like, but I think in terms of what we faced, it was this real idea of quite overtly laddish culture. And actually, as a female figurehead of behaviour and leading this, it ended up becoming quite a challenge. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we are terming toxic masculinity, some of the problems we are currently facing and continue to face when we're dealing with this, and then some of the ways that we were looking at to kind of tackle this this toxic masculinity. So I'm sorry, this is a terrible graphic, but the idea that of toxic masculinity, and I thought this kind of definition fitted it best in terms of what we were dealing with, is the idea that masculinity becoming quite toxic. So when men, and in our case obviously our young men, were feeling the need to conform to quite rigid gender norms. And I think we found actually as a school and a leadership team that particularly post-COVID, a lot of our young men came back even more aggressive and even more dominant, and even, you know, their behaviour seemed even more toxic than ever. And there seemed to be this idea that they were kind of they lost the ability to kind of reason with their thoughts, particularly in conversations with females and female teachers. And they ended up just, their interactions with female members of staff and myself became quite aggressive. And there seems to be this absolute desire to be dominant over them in all situations. I suppose the first thing I kind of wanted to ask you as an audience is whether any of you had faced, or this version of toxic masculinity kind of rings true in any of your organisations, whether that's something that you found yourself experiencing at all. Yeah, and I think, and what was interesting to me actually thinking about it is that I think it had always been there, but it had never ever stood out to me as a massive problem, because I'd always dealt with it quite singularly. But then when it became a much wider issue, as I was dealing with this much wider issue, it really stuck out to me. So in terms of whole school, what we were seeing then, it was really quite inappropriate sexualized comments towards female staff in general, and just showing a level of disrespect really. What was most shocking, I think, was we had a number of female staff that were pregnant at the time, and there was quite a lot of kind of, you know, suggestions about who the father might be, that kind of laddish behavior, and it just showed a real level of disrespect against our females and members of staff. And whole school, I've termed it this kind of either like displays of aggression that were incongruous to the situation. So really simple things like, can you tuck your shirt in, or could you put your shoes on, or why are you wearing trainers, and then end up escalating into really quite aggressive confrontations and aggressive conflicts with these boys, because I think they felt that you didn't have a right to challenge them as a woman. You didn't have a right. And I think there was a real annoyance with me, particularly that they knew that I did have the power to challenge it, but not only did I have the power to challenge it, but I could also take it all the way. And I think they found that quite difficult. So in terms of my personal experiences around that, I found from parents there's a real lack of respect. And that actually, interestingly, was from mums and dads. There was lots of kind of accusations when I'd been in situations with their sons, that I was screaming at them, or I was out of control, or I was absolutely hysterical. And obviously that, you know, this is only second hand through their child. But it was interesting to me, for me, the way that they'd passed on that information to their parents. They genuinely felt that me simply wanting to maintain the school rules and me simply asking them to do that, they found that I was out of control, or they thought I'd gone hysterical, or I thought I was screaming. And you know, these terms slag, slut, bitch, whore, you know, were used. And again, I don't think it's unique to our school, and I don't think it's actually something that I hadn't experienced before. But it really stood out to me that I was getting a lot of these comments, and they were very gender based, and I didn't kind of see or notice these previous. So I suppose, again, I was just wanted to ask, have we found as women, female educators, that we've had this quite gendered language used against us? So it's not just rudeness, but it's quite targeted, gendered rudeness. Yeah, and it was really interesting actually when talking to parents about because they'd often talk to the male in the room, if the male was a teacher, and I found that some of them almost found it difficult to refer to me as a vice principal, or talk to me as a vice principal. They didn't seem to want to do that. And actually, when talking to dads about some of the really aggressive comments, I'd get things like, yeah, well, you annoyed him, or yeah, well, you frustrated him, or as though it was an acceptable way to talk, and as you know, that was an acceptable expression of anger. So I started off, and this is the best graphic really that I could find to describe how I started off, just being furious about it. And I had a big feminist head on and was just absolutely furious about the fact that it was happening, and wanted to tackle every battle immediately and make these boys change and stop them talking about me and other female members of staff in that way. But I realised that that's not necessarily what was going to, that wasn't going to be the best way to tackle this problem and the best way to kind of handle it. And I had to really take a step back and think, what is it, or what was it about these young men that are kind of causing them to respond in such an aggressive way towards me? So I had, you know, we've got some incredibly strong female members of staff at our school, so we kind of sat down and had to think about, you know, if we want things to change, then we've got to change these young men. And you know, in most cases, we weren't necessarily going to change the aggression in the way that the parents were thinking about me or female leaders. But actually, what we could do is start to tackle some of the views that the boys had about women in leadership and women in control. So we thought kind of a three-pronged attack, really, looking at our culture and climate and the way that was creating respect for female leaders, and the way that was going to tackle some of those ideas that they had about female leaders. And what we found, that actually simply tackling behaviour in terms of a compliance issue was not going to address some of these issues. It was just going to create more conflict. We looked at the PSHE curriculum and how we could kind of utilise some of the learning from that to help our young men, and then around our extended curriculum as well. So one of the first things we thought about, and I'd done a lot of reading into thinking about why our boys were behaving like this, and what was it that created this view of women. And actually, aside from the fact that a lot of it was from their backgrounds, because we'd seen evidence of it from their fathers, I noticed that when I was looking at this term about, you know, looking at lots of stuff about boys groups and lads together and toxic masculinity and this laddish behaviour, loads of stuff came out about belonging, but linked to kind of masculinity, football violence, hooliganism. And it seemed that what drew these boys in, particularly young boys, what drew them in all together was this feeling that they belonged to something really strongly. And they had a mutual respect for each other, even the people that they were fighting against in these, you know, in this violence against other football teams. There was a real mutual respect for each other because they felt like they really belonged. And I thought, if we could try, or we all thought, if we could try and create that sense of belonging in our organisation so that they felt that they belonged to us, rather than simply coming to us and then finding their belonging elsewhere, we could perhaps start to change some of the ways that they were viewing women in leadership and female members of staff. So this phrase, this quote here, "no one belongs here more than you," we've really started to try and utilize that in our kind of the way that we're talking to students, the culture and climate of the way we're talking to students. It's kind of underpinning everything we do when we're talking around behavior and standards. You know, talking to boys about, does that really show a sense of belonging? Does that show that you belong to us? Does that show respect for members of your team? And actually, we've found that, you know, it's in its infancy, but we've found that if we can start to encourage our boys to feel part of our team, they are much less likely to be disrespectful towards us and see us as the enemy. Because in the first case, what we did do was, through our assembly program, we'll just tell them about toxic masculinity. We'll just explain to them what some of these behaviors are. We'll just explain why it's wrong, and they'll realize and stop doing it. But actually what we found, particularly because I think we're in a predominantly white working class area, we found that a lot of our young men were very defensive when we first delivered this message. They were really angry about the fact that we perhaps saw them in this way. And actually, you know, they kind of gave us the evidence we need, because they got furious about it. But they were furious because they felt a sense of injustice, but they also couldn't really articulate or verbalize why they felt this sense of injustice. So it was something that we really wanted to work on in terms of creating that sense of belonging. I suppose, again, just a little pause here, just to has anyone else found in trying to tackle this that they've had a lot of pushback from their young men, that they've not accepted the term toxic masculinity, or they've not seen it as something that they can align with at all, or they've gone down the not all men route? Yeah, and I think, yeah, exactly. You know, what about men that get raped? What about this? And actually trying to explain that message to them in terms of, yeah, but right now we're not dismissing that, but right now we're talking about females, and right now we're talking about women, was really difficult. And I was actually quite shocked at how much pushback we had from that. So we had to kind of think again about how are we going to get these boys on board with what we're trying to do here. So as well as this idea of belonging, we've thought about, in terms of our PSHE program, how we can get boys to recognize what it is to have a healthy masculinity and what that means. And in some cases, that means really challenging everything that they've seen and that they know about masculinity and what that looks like throughout their whole childhood, actually. And I think having really strong female role models has really helped with that. But actually, having strong male role models as allies has been incredibly important in doing that as well. And so we've created this team and this idea that just has an absolute zero tolerance to that, but is challenging it rather than just simply punishing it. And I think that's been really important. We also found that a lot of this stemmed from home, but from a lot of unhealthy relationships. And whether they went as far as domestic violence in some cases was true, but actually we found with a number of our boys, there was a real imbalance in the equality of the relationships they saw at home. So parents were still together, but gender roles were incredibly fixed. The women were often seen as inferior to the husband, and there's very strict gender roles created this situation. And what we found was that it tended to only be the mums that came in. So when the mums came in, they were obviously were remorseful and very sorry about the way that their child had reacted, but none of it, a very small number of dads seemed to want to accept the problem or face the problem. So we've been tackling that as well, about what does a healthy relationship look like, and in some cases it might look very different to what you know a relationship to be. So again, it's in its infancy, but we're working really hard to kind of move from that. Couple of other things, we've got our pride behaviours, so we focus on these in encouraging our young people to obviously demonstrate these in lessons, but also demonstrate them in every aspect of life. So really thinking about making a positive, respectful impact in everything that they do. And we really are encouraging our students to be engaged. And I know another member of my team is watching tonight. She's fantastic. She's done loads of work in terms of around diversity and getting students engaged and participating in being allies, and really, as was spoke previously, about being anti-racist and anti-sexist, you know, and anti-homophobic, and really putting our efforts into that. And then finally, as part of our belonging, this idea of our coaching program, so the development of really strong relationships with members of staff to really enhance that sense of belonging. So they belong to us. Okay, we're part of a team, so therefore, you know, let's think about how we talk to each other as part of our team. And then the final thing that I set up, which kind of reflected where I was at in my strategic vision at the time, really, was last year we had a number of girls that were getting into a lot of trouble, but they were just furious and very opinionated, but just furious. And I didn't really know any other way just to term them than angry girls, and I totally stolen these images, so credit to the person that gave them. But I invited these angry girls just to come along once a week and have a cup of tea and crisps of their choice, which they did choose every week, and just talk to me and rant about things that made them really angry because they were furious and they didn't feel listened to. And it ended up just being a ranting session, but it was great to have a really opinionated young women using their voice for good, and using their voice to feel like they were being heard, and using their voice to really think about the things that made them angry. And you know, when we first started, there was loads of things on the surface of like really nitpicking things, but through the course of talking to them, we got to the sense of what has caused that anger though. Why are you angry about that? Let's have a look at the reasons why. I mean, it was often boyfriend talk, but let's look at the reasons why you're having the relationship issues that you are. Let's think about the dynamics there of that relationship. Let's think about the way you've reacted to that. Let's think about the way you're talking about the other girl in that situation, actually. So it was great to just have girls just ranting, and was great. But obviously, I'm hoping that I wanted this year to have a little bit more purpose to it. So as part of we've moved to have an extended curriculum, which is also going to help create this sense of belonging. But one of the groups that we've started, and it wasn't actually my suggestion, but is that one of our girls came forward and wanted to start a women's action group. And so actually what started off as a really kind of just a ranty session, getting all our anger out, but we're angry with, this year we're going to focus on how can we change those things? What can we do with our anger? What can we do with our anger to change things for the better? And what's been quite nice and really refreshing is actually, you know, we've started to tackle it with our students, but some boys want to be involved and lads want to be involved, and I think some of them just want to see what it's about, but they're not taking part because they don't agree with it, but they're taking part because they're starting to understand some of the anger, and they realize that they're not angry at you personally, they're angry at the series of injustice that our young women are facing, and the series of injustice that allows boys to talk in certain ways to girls. And so it's about challenging that. So I'm really excited to kind of see where that goes this year and what we can do in terms of that. Yeah, so that's all from me. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk. It's been great. I hope I haven't spoken too fast. My mum did give me that advice, so I hope I haven't spoken too fast tonight. But yeah, if there's any questions or anything that anyone wants to ask, then please feel free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. You didn't speak too fast. It was definitely really, really loud and clear. I have to say, I have fallen in love with this Angry Girls Club. Like, I needed this when I was in secondary school. Like 100% needed this when I was in secondary school. I just looked at it and I was like, oh my God, like I can only imagine like the uptake in schools.
It was brilliant.
Such a good idea. Such a good idea. But actually, do you know what? There's been lots and lots of thirst for thought in terms of the way you've dealt with this toxic masculinity and how you're dealing with it with the boys within your schools as well. Because obviously, I automatically just think of staff and think of, from my perspective, like being on training day. Not necessarily, I haven't really had too much of it in the schools I've worked in. I mainly get it when, you know, you go on training days and it's generally a room full of men when you're a senior leader in these circumstances, and then I come along and they just look at me like, what are you doing here? That's the way you feel anyway. Yeah. And then there's all of this kind of competitive conversations and really inappropriate comments that happen. and you kind of, bite your lip and just don't say anything because you don't feel, you know, that it's the right time or place. But actually this has just brought about the fact that actually it's rooted in like children. And that's where we need to start tackling it and having it as a conversation in schools from a really young age. And then hopefully that will start breaking that down.
Absolutely. I think I totally agree. I think, you know, we know that if we can start to get our boys thinking about these things in a different way, they're going to go on to become better men. And I think that's really important. So that's the work we're doing.
No, absolutely. Really, really great. Thank you so much. There's lots and lots of comments there. Lots of people taking loads of inspiration from what you're doing in school as well. So that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
And so that then, and actually, I just saw Kay had written a comment to you actually just at the end. She's on Next, and she was just saying she's done lots of research into this as well and posted it. So yeah, we could check that out too. So it does bring me on to Dr. Kay Fuller. She is an associate professor in educational leadership, reader, writer, teacher, researcher, and actually is the regional leader for Women Ed East Midlands. Dr. Kay Fuller, are you ready?
Well,
you are last on our panel for today. I'm excited about this.
I'm here and ready, and I did a test earlier, as you know, Natasha, and now I can't work out how to share the right page for my presentation.
That's right. Go down to the share screen, the green one, and then click away. And then if it's the wrong one, I'll just tell you.
Yeah, I've got everything except my PowerPoint.
Always. That's just, you know, this is technical hitches.
It is, isn't it? I might have to go without slides, which is a shame.
If you close your Zoom down and then maybe reopen the PowerPoint, it will come up when you do share screen again.
Yeah, and I'll just try and do this. Sorry to everybody.
No, it's absolutely no problem at all. Someone's recommending that you do the go naked like Jill Berry did last year. I don't think she means literally naked. I think she means go without the presentation if you feel comfortable too.
I'll try one more time.
No worries.
But my PowerPoint isn't there. I've got all sorts of other things open, but not my slides. Anyway, there were not very many slides. So I can go naked like Jill. I'd be quite. There was actually a picture of Jill, and so it's a shame not to see that. But it really is an honour to follow all these wonderful speakers. I think this is something that I've always enjoyed about Women Ed, is that people share so generously with their thinking and their experiences and their, you know, practical suggestions. And as always, I've really enjoyed listening to each and every one of the people who preceded me. Only one of them, I think I noticed only one of them using the word feminist, and that was Emily. Emily said she had put her feminist hat on. And so I do just want to ask you, before I carry on, how many people actually identify as feminist? Just put a yes in the chat box if you do, and no if you don't, and maybe, or if you fluctuate, and this is, you know, something that you are quite thoughtful about, but you don't necessarily easily buy into. So the title of my presentation is Feminist Leadership X. And I'm delighted to have my talk accepted in the section entitled Tackling an Unfair System. It's all too easy to assume that we're alone in our struggles, whatever they may be, for recognition, to be heard, for parity of participation, as Nancy Fraser would put it, when actually the barriers some of us face in our workplaces and learning spaces stem from multi-level systemic and structural inequalities of racism, poverty, homo, trans, Islamophobia, and sexism. Collectively, Women Ed enables us to stand up and speak up for what matters in education, and we've heard people doing that already tonight. Please tweet during my talk. Please express yourselves in the chat box, and I'll try and keep an eye on that. I aim to make space for your dialogue because I really do always learn an enormous amount at these events. And I was going to show you some pictures of me over time in 7-year intervals. So one of me as a baby, 7 years old, 14, 21. And some of you will be familiar with the UK television series 7 Up. And I've used 7-year intervals to do a critical autoethnography of my life as it relates to gender, class, social class, to education policy, and my identity as a student, teacher, leader, and scholar. If you're interested in reading it, it's available by open access from Frontiers in Education. The findings were interesting. I discovered I must re-narrate my story as one of white privilege rather than social mobility. So I'd always seen myself as a working class girl. Both my parents did not get brilliant education. They both left sort of 14, 15 years old without any qualifications whatsoever. And both my sister and I went on to Russell Group universities. So I've always seen it being a story of social mobility. But actually, when I started looking at it through the lens of race, I had to recognize my white privilege. And we had Jane and Angeline talking about that critical reflexivity that they'd engaged in terms of the work in their organisation, and Jane's response to her friend or colleague writing about and responding to the murder of George Floyd. So to introduce myself further, I'm an Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Nottingham. I teach on the MA in Educational Leadership and Management programme, both on campus with full-time international students and by distance learning. And a lot of our students are working across the world in international schools very often. My scholarship focuses on women, gender and feminism in educational leadership and has done for about 20 years. So that actually started when I was still a head of English and deputy head at a comprehensive school. I started my doctorate then. I'm a former English teacher, head of English, deputy head teacher and school governor in 5 mixed comprehensive schools in the English West Midlands. I'm a former initial teacher educator and had the privilege of working with some of you as beginning teachers. Indeed, I'm following one of them, and I knew Emily as Emily Hurst. She was a fantastic student, and we heard tonight that she's obviously a fantastic teacher and leader. So the title of my talk is Numerical. The X stands for 10th. In a series I've given at Women-led Unconferences and regional events in the East and West Midlands since 2015, to schools on International Women's Days and to staff at the Department for Education. I can't believe it's 6 years since some of us first met at the first Unconference in London. However, I also like the connotations of mystery that come with X. Person X is a person unknown. So what is feminist leadership in education? I've given a great deal of thought to that in the last couple of years as to what feminist perspectives on contemporary educational leadership might comprise. That's the title of my new book, currently in production at Routledge. What might the X be in relation to feminist leadership? That's something for you to think about today. I'd like you to tweet or chat about what you think feminist leadership is in education. And don't worry, this is not data collection at all. This is not going to be used for research purposes. This is just for a conversation today. I want to retrace some steps for a few moments before I address that more fully. At the first Unconference, my workshop proved popular as a discussion of what we might understand about feminist leadership based on existing scholarship. Largely the work of Jill Blackmore at that stage. I remember in that workshop I was talking about her work, and some of you may know that work. But the session was remarkable for me because I was interrupted by one man in the room who was more interested in Twitter trending than anything we had to say about feminism, leadership and education. I was fascinated that he assumed we were only interested in social media, not by the substance of what we were there to discuss. At the second Unconference in Reading, I had my preconceptions about men's engagement with women ed swept away. This time, the one man in the room identified himself as a feminist. He spoke about why feminism in educational leadership matters to him. That was Chris Hildrew. He has subsequently written about women ed in blogs and has a chapter in Vivian Porritt and Kezia Featherstone's first collection, 10% Braver, by and about women ed members, published in 2019. Other men at that Unconference acknowledged the impact of being minoritized in a room full of women, collectively empowered by women ed. Now, in the book, I actually say I was fascinated that they admit that they were marginalized by the women in the room, by that collectivity of the women in the room. They actually manage and lead in schools where women dominate. So I'm fascinated that they don't feel that in schools, because women dominate in the education workforce, certainly in English secondary schools and primary schools. So I was fascinated that it was actually the power that they were intimidated by, that we were actually clearly an empowered group of women as women ed members. So it was interesting that they felt disempowered, and I was pleased they were willing to admit it. They admitted it there and then, and have since admitted it in writing in some of the women ed publications and in research that I've done. So it was the first time they'd been disempowered as white heterosexual professional men. For me, that was a powerful moment. For the first time, I recognised how important the inclusivity is. I'd always thought feminism was about, for and by women, but men and women ed leaders have shown it is important for us all to address inequality, inequity, and intersectional disadvantages and oppressions in education and employment in education. And that's important to me, that it is about both, that it is about employment in education. And we've heard speakers talking about what we must do when we're recruiting people, but it is also about education. And we've had speakers talking about the education of young people around gender issues. At subsequent talks, I covered first, second, third, and fourth wave feminism. However, since 2019, there were a series of personal and professional stresses that prevented me contributing as much as I would have liked. Like many people, I had to streamline my commitments, focus on family and paid work. I gave up some voluntary commitments. But during that time, I didn't stop reading, thinking, and writing about women ed. So I've been writing this book, Feminist Perspectives on Contemporary Educational Leadership, that draws on scholarship from 3 main research projects. 2 were comparative projects, one with colleagues researching women head teachers in the US and South Africa, the other with colleagues in Jamaica, Scotland, and New Zealand. In the English context, I focused on that occasion on women head teachers who identified with Black and global majority heritages. The third was with Dr. Jill Berry. She and I undertook a research project that explored the first 2 years of women ed, and that was funded by the University of Nottingham. We reported the survey findings in a series of blogs in 2017 that are still available on the Women Ed WordPress blog site. We produced a report about those, and that's available on open access. And the findings from 45 interviews with women ed leaders, women who experienced workplace discrimination after 2010. And 2010 was because of the Equality Act in the UK. And I was interested that people were still quite responsive to that from international contexts, that they got that this was recent discrimination. And men, as women ed followers and supporters, and women ed leaders were really quite keen that we talk to men about their thinking about women ed. Jill has given me permission to write further about our project. There are 3 chapters in my new book that focus on queer theory and feminism, digital feminism, and men and pro-feminism. These are based on what Women Ed members told us. I frame the book in terms of fourth wave feminism. There are also chapters about intersectionality, Islam and feminism, and applied critical leadership that focus on the cultural wealth head teachers and learners bring to their schools and classrooms as funds of knowledge, funds of identity, community cultural wealth. I also have a chapter about Women Ed coming out in the Bloomsbury Handbook of Gender and Educational Leadership and Management, edited by Dr. Victoria Shawunmi, Dr. Ponce Marusi, Professor Cheryl Shapeshaft, and Professor Itzhak Platka, all of whom are well known for their scholarship in the field of women and gender in educational leadership. My chapter is about intersectional discrimination. It explores the complexities of intersectionality as they were experienced, more importantly, as they were felt by people in Women Ed. So the title is about feeling, knowing intersectional discrimination when we feel it. In the new book, I focus on Women Ed members' self-identification or not with feminism and activism. It seems to me that Women Ed is about professional activism. It has at its core the employment interests of women and all people of marginalised and minoritized identities, including trans and cis women, non-binary and intersex people, and the education interests of learners across phases and sectors of education. It's a remarkably inclusive network that includes people in public, and I mean state funded in the American sense of public, not the English sense of public, and private, which we call public, fee-paying education, international schools, as we've heard tonight, people working as administrators and support staff, as well as educators, volunteers as parents and governors and trust directors. I was struck at that first Unconference that anyone from a CEO to a beginning teacher could rub shoulders with one another at a Women Ed event. These days, that has to be socially distanced or virtually, of course. There's tremendous cooperation and generosity between members. Vivian Porritt, Dr. Joanne Cliff, and I got some Belmas funding to do a research and development project that is likely to result in a paper that demonstrates that, and just how people share resources through peer support as coaching and mentoring, for example. Now, for me, the alignment of anger, and this has come up already this evening. There was a tweet about it last night, about the importance of anger. Anger about what is unfair in our education system and wider society. The alignment of that anger with hope that something can be done about it is the hallmark of what Women Ed does. This is what Prudence Chamberlain calls the affective temporality of fourth wave feminism. That combination of anger and hope empowers us to take action, to stand up and speak up for what we think matters in our work and learning places, in our schools, colleges and universities, in our education systems, in our regions and countries across the world, in our various cultures and societies. I cannot fail to be moved by the women protesting in the streets in Afghanistan, by the Saudi women studying for PhDs about women's leadership in higher education, by the accounts of physical danger one of my PhD students has uncovered from a feminist leader in a Pakistani university. There are many good reasons why some people do not identify as feminist, including physical danger, but also associations with imperial feminism, colonialism, and whiteness. Some people prefer to talk about gender justice or social justice more generally. I'm inspired by these people. I'm inspired by the people I've heard tonight to speak up in my own workplace. I said to my mum on the phone yesterday, if all of these women can speak up, then I must be able to speak up in my own workplace when I see something that's wrong. You know, if it's not going to hurt me to speak up in the way that it might hurt some women in some countries. But I must remember that intersectionality for me means acknowledging what what Kalwant Bhopal calls white privilege has and continues to benefit me hugely in my education and career in educational leadership. At one of our events, and I tried to find the picture of the pledge today, and I could only find the one that said I would help develop an East Midlands network. But there was one where I pledged that I would always include intersectionality in my work. So I, like so many other people here, am proud to identify as an intersectional feminist and women-ed activist. And as Helena Marsh quoted in one of the first blogs that led to Women Ed, a definition of feminism might be the feminism of friendship. She attributed it to Shami Chakrabarti and Doreen Lawrence at an Empowering Women in Leadership conference she attended in 2015. So I want to pause here and thank you for listening and to ask you, how do you define feminist leadership in education? What's that X for you? And I'm going to go back to the chat box and just try and find what you were saying. So I've got people answering the question about whether they see themselves as feminists, and there are an awful lot of people who are saying yes, who are being unhesitating and unapologetic about being feminist. And then we get to know, maybe I'm scared of admitting I am. And I think that was you, Natasha. Do you want to say anything about that, or is that really putting you on the spot?
No, do you know what, actually, because I was actually going to say, I, like, in a really unbrave way, would not sit there and fully say, yeah, I'm a feminist, and I'm, because I think one of the reasons is obviously I'm in the Middle East, I'm a little bit cagey about things. But the other thing is sometimes all of the stuff that comes with it, which you've kind of, for me, just gone through, kind of dispelled some of that, I suppose, because you were explaining there, and I was just taking a few notes about us having to work together, and I just wrote down hashtag he for she, and how actually it's not just women going out there and saying, look, it's all about women and we're trying to take over the world. And I think that's what I get a little bit scared about from my perspective, is people thinking that this is all about women saying, well, actually, do you know what, we should be at the front and center of everything, and we should be taking over. And it's not that. We are saying, actually, can we be part of this, please? And actually, can we just have an equal footing, rather than we're just coming here to take over the world, because that's not the case. And I completely, I mean, this was what drew me to Women Ed in the very beginning when I saw Vivian speak. It was just like, actually, this is just loads of people getting together and actually just supporting each other. And it's just a network of supportive women. And there are some men that are supporting us as well. And actually just having that network, it is like a big group of friends that are just allowing people to have open conversations about how they're feeling. And actually, I also wrote down the word anger in capitals, and just say, and we've it's been mentioned loads of times this evening that anger is kind of what people get to before there's then the change, because you kind of get to anger and then there's a change that happens. And I am kind of like, well, why do we have to get to that anger bit? Why do we need to get to there before it changes? But actually, when you've looked at any main change, anything that's happened, it has got to anger, it's got to near-on explosion. And that's when people start listening.
But it has to be that combination of anger and hope we wouldn't be taking action if we didn't have hope that something would change. So I think Prudence Chamberlain's articulation of that is really helpful, and I think that that's been useful for me to use in thinking about Women Ed in particular. And I've got here, so I've got your caution. So, you know, there's slight reluctance, and I've got someone else saying, but I didn't realize I was for a long time. And so we have found that in the research that Jill and I did, that there were people who were unhesitating, unapologetic, wholehearted, didn't care what the connotations of being a feminist were at all, and they were aware of all the negative ones. And then we had people who were newly feminist, who discovered they were, and there were people who were tentative, and there were definitely people who said, no, I'm not a feminist. I have enough crosses to bear without being called a feminist. So it was fascinating to see that variety, and men were in similar positions. They were cautious about calling themselves feminists. They might think of themselves as allies, and didn't want to interfere in the work that the women were doing. But I think that it is a wonderfully inclusive network. I think it's, you know, it's given me an enormous amount of hope and inspiration, having done this work for such a long time. So thank you for giving me the chance to talk about it.
Sorry, Kay, can I just pick up on that point about feminism? Because I think it's a really interesting one. I remember having a conversation with a student in my classrooms, and she was saying that she would never call herself a feminist because for her, it was associated with something really negative, the kind of the whole feminazi idea. And I think a lot of that fear that people have about feminism is that this kind of negative, kind of anti-propaganda almost that's presented about feminism. And I think, again, it's about going back to Kezia's point at the beginning, this whole narrative around Sarah Everard and the fact that now we've all got to wave buses down if we want to, you know, if we're getting arrested by the police. It's the same agenda, isn't it? Let's turn women against each other, and then they won't network, they won't connect.
And Kezia would talk to you about, you know, what happened, you know, with some of the Twitter chats. So one of the chapters about digital feminism is that whole business of the backlash that people were getting, and I framed that as coming off, you know, Women Ed came off stage and went into a Yammer space that Microsoft created, where they regrouped and they decided what they were about, and they went back out in force again. And it was a really powerful thing to be privileged to have heard about them talking about and to be able to write about it. I've just found Amanda's post about Adichie's "We Should All Be Feminists," and absolutely, I'm trying to get funding for a project to buy children the book, because in Sweden the children were all bought the book because of course you should all be feminists. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Thank you for your posts. I think my time is up. I hope I haven't run on too much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Not at all. Thank you, Kay. And what a brilliant way to end our first session tonight. Tasha, it's been brilliant, hasn't it?
No, absolutely. I'm so inspired. I'm so, like, they're just the things that we've had shared this evening in these last couple of hours is so much. I'm excited for the rest of the weekend, actually, and just what else there is to come. It's amazing. I'm just going to share. All right, hang on a minute.
Oh, yeah, got to get our slides in.
Well, do you know what? I've just put it on the wrong thing, so I don't know how to.
While Tasha is trying to sort the tech out, I'll just add that, you know, please note that we've got a few things going on at the moment, including the NCE. We made reference to them at the beginning of the evening. We are recruiting for our January 2022 cohort, and I know that anyone, and Nicola spoke briefly about it at the beginning, and her involvement with that master's course, but the Women Ed only cohort, it really is something quite special, really empowering, supportive network of people working together there. So if anyone is watching actually and you know, wants to put anything in the chat about that master's course, that would be brilliant if you could just share your thoughts about it. but it has been really, really powerful for all the women involved in it. And if you're interested and you are in England, sadly, it's just in England. I couldn't take part in it either, sadly. But it is free as part of the apprenticeship levy. So you can actually do a master's for free, which is well worth doing it. Thanks, Shirley. That's brilliant. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah. Everything I read about it on the tweets is amazing, and it inspired me to go and do a master's as well, even though I didn't get mine paid for. But yeah, it sounds amazing. You got there, Tasha?
Yeah, there in the end, finally. Everyone, so just as a reminder, just as we end this evening of our campaigns, so we obviously have 4 campaigns, and we are constantly speaking about these and wanting to make waves and cause disruption and make change. So 4 campaigns are: increase representation of women in leadership roles, increase diversity of women in leadership roles, advocate for flexible working practices, and reducing the gender pay gaps. So everybody should be aware of those campaigns if you see anything that we put up on Women Ed anyway, but also the whole weekend links to these campaigns as we're going throughout the weekend. And then let's see.
Yeah, I was going to say that the whole structure of this Unconference is linked around them, just like last year as well. But we're trying to really kind of drill down into our Being 10% Braver book as well. Ta-da, look at that. That was perfect. We'd think that we'd plan that, Tash.
Honestly.
Yeah, so it's all linked around some of the chapters titles from 10% Braver. Sorry, Being 10% Braver. So hopefully, you know, we can explore some of those issues about owning our own bravery, for example, and tackling an unfair system, which was tonight's session.
Fantastic. And just a reminder, you obviously have had the Menti link posted a couple of times in the chats over this evening, and it is open for the whole weekend. So when you go in, you just need to do www.menti.com and the code, which I am just going to get up because
I've got it. It's 2006 0028.
Perfect.
And it's in the chat as well several times. So if you want to go back and get it, but we'll be tweeting it, we'll be sharing it over the weekend as well. And I'm back tomorrow morning at 9:30.
Yeah, we're both back together actually. We're both doing this, and then we've got our panel discussion as well. So I'm quite excited about that.
Yeah. And what's tomorrow's session called, Tasha? Can you remember?
Yep. Oh no, that's the second session. Our one is owning our bravery.
Owning our bravery. That's brilliant, isn't it? And actually, there's a lot from tonight that we thought actually there's a lot of bravery, a lot of inspiration, a lot of disruption going on tonight, wasn't there? Absolutely. For sure. Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a great evening, and we'll see you hopefully. We'll see some of you in the morning. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.